Great, thank you, and welcome to the last Good Systems Speaker Series event of the spring semester. We appreciate you, folks who are returning, and welcome anyone who's new. For anyone who's new, I'm Stacy Cayley, the Good Systems Network Relationship Manager, and Good Systems is the interdisciplinary ethical AI Grand Challenge at UT Austin. We are comprised of more than 150 researchers working across 30 different disciplines on campus to design ethical AI technologies for the benefit of society. And I'm really pleased today to introduce our host and the past chair of Good Systems, Dr. Sharon Strover, who is the Philip G. Warner Regents Professor in the Moody College of Communication here at UT Austin, and co-leads our Being Watched Embedding Ethics in Public Cameras research project. Dr. Strover, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stacy. Hi, everybody. So I'm very pleased that you could join us today, and I'm especially pleased to be able to host Professor Howard Besser. Howard is Professor Emeritus from one of the best cinema studies programs in the country at NYU. And he founded the master's program in moving image archiving and preservation at that institution. He has over 30 years of experience in information studies as an educator, and he's published countless articles and conducted numerous workshops as well. In 2009, he was named to the Library of Congress's select list of pioneers of digital preservation. He's taught courses on digital preservation and in surveillance video, and it's especially the surveillance side of things that brought me to Howard's work, because the project that is sponsoring his talk today is especially interested in contemporary surveillance capabilities. Howard designed the policy course for the Society of American Archivists Digital Archives Specialist Certificate Program, and also co-founded the Library Freedom Institute, a nationwide project to train privacy advocates to teach digital privacy skills and to advocate for enlightened privacy policies. Arguably, we've never needed that more than we need it right now as well. Well, with that introduction, I'm very pleased then to turn this over to Howard Besser. We'll leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the hour for questions from the audience. So, Howard.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. So today I'm going to be talking about preserving digital images and data, methods, policy, and privacy issues. All my slides are available at the URL listed at the bottom, but I'll show it. I'll show this URL again at the end, so you don't have to take notes. First, I'm going to be talking about how privacy can be an issue, then about police body cam videos. Then I'll talk about memory institutions such as libraries, museums, and archives, why archiving digital works is different from archiving analog works, and how archives need to become proactive at building individual collections from multiple sources. And I'll wind up talking at some length about lessons from collecting information from the Occupy movement. So archivists want comprehensive collections, and the more you collect, the better picture you have of the individual, group, event, or movement that you're trying to collect. But the more you collect, the greater the likelihood you'll scoop up information that violates someone's privacy. And this private information often needs to be redacted or reduced or eliminated, some of it eliminated. So here's a recent protest a couple months ago that took over a bridge in San Francisco. And you can see people's faces. And an image like this can be used to convict people. These images found on social media from the January 6th protests were used to convict people there. During Occupy, the police took a protester. They tried to assemble evidence that a protester was on a bridge that was taken over in New York City, and the judge, the protester had tweeted about this, and then he had deleted his tweets, but the police the district attorney went to court and the judge ordered Twitter to actually turn over both the tweets and the geolocation so that they could prove that he was at this particular event and that he was there at the point in time when in order to disperse had been admitted. So when archives are collecting digital information, they use a tool called Bit Curator to actually go through that, and this can be used to redact information. So privacy and protest is still in the news. This is from an article from last month where a US lawmaker cited New York City protests in defense of warrantless spying. A closed-door presentation for House lawmakers late last year portrayed American anti-war protesters as having possible ties to Hamas in an effort to kill privacy reforms to a major US spy program. Okay, so let's talk for a few minutes about police body cam videos. This is what they look like. They're worn on the front, on the chest of police officers. And they have a wide angle for seeing, so you can actually see the policeman's hands when he shoots someone. The New York University Law School policing project developed an evaluative framework on responsible use of technology. And this is, I think, very useful, not just for what they did, but it would be useful for good systems to look at. So this framework, they look at it in terms of the legal aspects, the ethical aspects, and the democratically accountable aspects. So in terms of legal, they ask, does the technology violate constitutional and other legal principles such as free exercise of First Amendment liberties, equal protection of the law, and other rights guaranteed by law? In the ethical dimension, they ask, can the technology be designed and operated in ways that minimize social harms, including overcriminalization and threats to privacy and autonomy? And in the democratically accountable aspects, has the police agency been transparent about its use of the technology? Were communities consulted before the technology was developed? So there's a host of arguments in favor of releasing body cam videos to the public, as well as a set of arguments against. Here are some of the arguments in favor. It shows Releasing these can show that the department is open and transparent to the public. It can increase public trust in the police department and its use of force investigations. It can help the public understand how and when force is used by the police and what the department's policies do and do not permit officers to do. It can ensure that officers are held accountable if they use force inappropriately. It can provide more complete context, particularly if other video, such as from a cell phone camera, has been released publicly. And it can correct any rumors or misperceptions that the public may have about what occurred. The arguments against releasing body cams to the public, body cam videos to the public, are that it makes it more difficult for the department to investigate the incident. Witnesses may report what they see on the video instead of what they actually remember, or be less likely to come forward if they think that video tells the whole story. It can cause distress to family members of either the officer or the civilians involved, particularly if the video is very graphic and is shared widely by mainstream or social media. It can bias potential jurors in a criminal case against the officer or civilian involved. It can create public confusion about what occurred, particularly if the video only captures part of the incident. And it can violate the privacy of the individuals captured in the recording, particularly if the incident takes place in a private home. The amount of storage you need for these police body cam videos is really great. So the average officer will produce 20 gigabytes of video per month. And if every officer in the US on patrol used a body cam, it would create over 1,100 years of footage in just 1 month. So these really take up a lot of space. So the body cam, using the body cams footage creates a set of policy and procedural questions. Like, when does the camera get turned on? When does it get turned off? How long do you keep the footage? Does the footage get redacted by blurring faces or cutting footage out? Is it redacted for some groups and not for others? There's often sensitive situations captured here, like an interview with a rape victim. Who can see the footage? The general public, the subject or defendant, the officer involved. What about public records requests, freedom of information access requests? When can people see the footage? Like, can the officer see the footage before they write up their incident report? And security procedures and costs. Now, the collections want to keep as much as possible, because the more you keep, the better the representation of what happened. Think about an incident where you have a number of officers there, each with a camera from a different angle, gives a much bigger picture of what actually happened, and you want to keep as much as possible and only minimally redact it. But this conflicts with privacy concerns. So there are privacy issues with third parties captured, like bystanders, with intimate locations like bedroom interviews. There's issues of sensitive depictions like mutilated bodies, sensitive situations like rape interviews, and lengthy retention times leads to privacy issues because it's up and available for a longer period of time. And there's a serious cost to redactions because redactions can't be done totally in an automated way. Um, in terms of deciding policy, policy for body cam videos is by jurisdiction. So your county sheriff's office might have one policy, your city police department might have another policy. So in developing policies, you want to get the stakeholders together to discuss the proposed policies. That includes law enforcement agencies, advocacy groups, vendors, media journalists, archivists. And you want this group of people to look at the design, deployment, and control of new recording technologies. And you want guidance from the legal and social construction of policy, open access requirements for government records, and audiovisual recordings as evidence. In 2016, we had a several-day retreat to talk about this and brought the various stakeholders together to talk about the technical future and challenges, core competencies, education and training needs, curriculum review, delivery models for professional and continuing education, and identification of key resources and literature review. So now I'm going to talk about born digital content in archival collections. What do we collect in archives? Correspondence or an email, personal photos, movies, manuscript drafts, camera original footage, rough cuts of videos, personal documents, diaries. In the analog world, traditionally, we've come to understand the works of writers, scientists, or filmmakers. We've done this by scholars studying their papers and footage in special collections and archives. They're looking at their correspondence and progressively different drafts of papers like version 1, version 2, version 3. These reveal their changing thoughts and crafts. But how do we gather these in the digital age? So manuscripts look like this, often highly annotated like this one is. Correspondence can be typewritten or handwritten. But where can we find these today? Do people write letters on paper? Can we see the iterations of changes on manuscripts as you go from version 1, version 2, version 3? Or is it all just one file without any versioning on it? Where can we find today's equivalent of these? So in previous work, I've divided this into two stages of the problem. Stage one is when people record on digital media instead of analog. So this is when an archive might collect the hard disk of someone. Stage two is when people no longer store their works in places over which they have absolute control, like their hard disk. Instead, they're storing things elsewhere, like in the cloud. So this would include email services like Gmail and Yahoo, cloud storage for documents such as Google Docs, social network services such as Vimeo, YouTube, and Instagram. So with the stage one, it's essentially someone's hard disk, collecting someone's hard disk. And we still have to do some new things with that. Archives are already adapting to this, but it requires new interventions like trying to change creators' workflow, intervening in email handling software, new tools like Stanford University's ePad for analyzing email, and new approaches like digital archaeology and forensics with tools like BitCurator, which I mentioned briefly earlier. So right now I'm more concerned with stage two, which this is when content is no longer on the hard disk. This poses a real challenge still for archives. The rise of online services and social media is changing where this content resides and is imposing terms of service restrictions that go beyond the rights holder. So the core problems with storing things in these multiple locations. It's difficult enough when someone's photos or movies are spread throughout their hard disk. But today, some images are there, but others are on their phones, YouTube, Vimeo, Instagram, Facebook, in tweets, etc. And most social network terms of service policies prohibit the owner from giving their password to anyone else, even a library or archive that's trying to collect this material. So the importance of aggregated content. Our archival collections are mainly by people. They're collected in collections under an individual's name. Here's the Online Archive of California, and if you look like halfway down this list, you see that there's the Fritz Beatty Memoranda, the Walter Beatty Papers, the Kelly Bars Collection, the Carl Boslak Papers, the James Babb and Nancy Babb papers. Everything is collected generally by people. Because you take a collection from an individual donor. But with social media, group activity is more important than ever. But so these are community groups, associations, ethnic groups, but each person in the group is an individual collector or contributor, and frequently a set of individual contributions forms the group collection. So increasingly, we have collections that are not already assembled. So the archive needs to actually proactively do the collecting. So we have this with ethnic groups, social and political movements, community groups, and cultural movements. So we have many people documenting a protest. If you look at all the cameras here, so personal contributions form an important picture of an event, an ethnic group, a community, a social movement, a set of architects, or a set of lawmakers, what's important to them, how they go about their business. And we know from past work that aggregations create new meanings. So for example, the digital diaspora was an attempt to aggregate all the photos and home movies of African Americans who are in general not adequately reflected in our archival collections, which tend to be essentially dead white men of European extraction. So the digital diaspora collects home movies, home photographic collections, collections of weddings and funerals of African Americans. And that collection by itself it's a collection of collections. So they actually they did a thing like to go around and collect personal collections, like antique roadshow type events where people would bring their collections to be scanned and form this collection of African American material. So one tweet says very little, but thousands of tweets can show trends or predict or depict a particular event or day. But aggregating items from disparate sources causes significant problems. There's a vast quantity of user-contributed material, there are rights issues, and there's no easy way to control for quality, file format, metadata. There's not even any consistency for any of these. So every image contributor or collector has a different approach. They have different file naming conventions, different file formats, different compression schemes, different metadata. They're stored in different arrangements or hierarchies and stored in different places like cell phone, personal hard disk, YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, Twitter, X, etc. Okay, so some sample collections. Where do we find this type of material? In archives and library special collections, in collections documenting a community or an ethnic group, a social movement, or the work of any other type of group, as I mentioned earlier, a set of architects or a set of lawmakers, and collections documenting an event. So for instance, we have a commercial collection documenting Woodstock, the definitive 50th anniversary archive of images taken at Woodstock, clips, home movies of Woodstock, the music, this images of the stage, etc. This takes up 38 CDs for this collection. Or we can have just a simpler collection of material like the Facebook collection documenting the Bloomington, Indiana Community Farmers Market. Documenting a social movement. This happens to be on Facebook from Generation Identity, right-wing social movement. Or documenting police misconduct. This is the Cop Watch collection. The Center for Asian American Media has developed a collection they call Memories to Light. And this is a national participatory arts project that collectively and aesthetically constructs shared social, cultural, and political representation of Asian America directly from the community itself. Since the mainstream media has given us so few authentic images of the Asian American experience, home movies become the most real way to see how our grandparents, mothers, fathers, aunts, and uncles live their lives. So here's the Memories to Light collection. We also have the International Digital Ephemera collection at UCLA, which collects material from social media and aggregates it. So let me now go through some key concepts from a group called Activist Archivists and others. I've participated in a number of large-scale multi-organizational projects of archivists looking at how digital archiving is different than analog archiving, and trying to look at the challenges that we have for digital archiving. And through two of these, the Interpares Project and Preserving Digital Public Television, we've come to the conclusion that it's really difficult to preserve digital material unless the collector or contributor had taken steps towards good archival practice. If we get a collection from an individual who has not practiced good archival practice, it's a tremendously greater amount of work involved in trying to preserve that material. So Activist Archivists was a group of my students and alumni who started out working on media, on preserving media from the Occupy movement. Activist Archivists developed guidelines for both activist creators and for archivists who are collecting this material. And we developed a number of low impact methods for contributors to practice good archival practice. So the material collected from Occupy and from social networks on where Occupy material was posted resembles what archives will be facing much more in the future. And that's a vast quantity of user contributed material, no easy way to control for quality, file formats, or metadata. There's no enforcing guidelines as you would have with an organization's records, and no semi-consistency as in a single individual's personal records. Much of the material is most easily to be found on social networks. And because of all this, we need to find smart ways to harvest metadata and analyze files, as well as to influence the behavior of particular contributors. So this is the website for activist archivists. And we learned a lot of lessons from that that are relevant to archives today. First off, for archives, we think that they need to communicate well with their future contributors. They need to learn to speak their language and help them to realize the importance of archiving. So I have a little video here. Unfortunately, we don't have the sound. But the sound is drum beating. So this was shown to activists as part of the Occupy movement, trying to tell them why archiving was important. So we also released this as part of a postcard. And the idea of tying principles of good archiving to principles of the Occupy movement, things like accountability and self-determination, tying those together, sharing, educate, continuity. This allows us to really speak to them and convince them that good practice, good archival practice. Through the Occupy movement, we also developed cooperative relationships with the occupiers, trying to better understand what their aims are, get involved in their activities, and developing partnering relationships. So we participated in skill shares around preserving Occupy material, and we we actually had a archival share day and with hackathon activities where we we worked with occupiers to download images from Flickr, which was a predecessor of things like Instagram, and develop good practice. So just those type of cooperative relationships. And then we tried to make it easy for future contributors to create archival friendly works. So really easy things to do, like turn your GPS on. Um, uh, and we developed 7 tips to ensure that your video is usable in the long run. So collecting details while filming, keeping the original raw footage, making your video discoverable, contextualizing it, making it verifiable, allowing others to collect and archive. We developed best practices for content creators, things like security, where we went over hidden camera laws and consent laws for who can be in public, who can be recorded. All kinds of best practices. And all of this got folded into the Activist Guide for Archiving Video, which was a publication by the human rights group Witness, authored by one of our activist archivists, Yvonne A. During Occupy, there was a weekly meeting to brainstorm future directions of Occupy. This was called the think tank. And the NYU library wanted to record, the audio record these meetings once a week. So they, with audio recording devices, they developed a set of guidelines that are redundant in order to make sure that the metadata was collected, metadata for date and time of these was collected. So we first set, the first guideline was to set the date and time on the recording device, but this actually seldom happened. They didn't remember to do this. So we also had them read a script at the beginning of the recording stating the date, time, and the proposed subject of that particular day's meetings. And this was the idea that we could use future voice recognition software to pull out that metadata, date, and time. And it also allowed the script to state that all participants agreed to a Creative Commons license of the recording. And finally, we asked that the date and time be embedded in the applied file name. So having all these levels of redundancy made sure that we would not lose the date and the time for these. We also tried to find smart ways to deal with scale. So the NYU Tamiment Collection, their archive, decided that they wanted to choose which videos from YouTube about the Occupy movement, which videos they should save. But they didn't realize how many videos there actually were. So by 6 months after the start of Occupy, there were 169,000 YouTube videos with the hashtag Occupy. There's no way that someone could look at all 169,000 and decide which they want to save and which they don't want to save. So we developed an alternative idea, an alternative approach to deciding what to save on YouTube. This was the idea that we could develop categories of important YouTube videos, like celebrity visits, internal workings of the library, the kitchen, the media, confrontations with police, labor issues, housing issues, etc. And we could have occupiers fill in an online form listing the 5 most important videos in each category. So the idea is to have the occupiers weigh in on what the most important videos would be. And the advantages of this YouTube collaborative filtering selection process are that it's scalable and manageable. It's consistent with Occupy's ideas of inclusiveness and of managing their own story. And the archive can still choose to be selective in collecting only a portion of what's voted in, but the total set for review is a manageable scale. This was never actually implemented because of the death of a key person, but this is an interesting approach to managing for scale. So we also want to handle privacy and security responsibly. So one of the organizations we partnered with towards the end of Activist Archivists was UCLA's Digital Ephemera Project. And here's a statement from the UCLA Digital Ephemera Project. In an effort to protect the privacy and personal safety of contributors to the Iranian Green Movement collection, the donor and UCLA Library agreed to work together to develop methodology and an approach, and will redact the email addresses or other personally identifiable information from broad public presentation. So this type of redaction is important. The Green Movement in Iran was an underground movement, and collecting this material at UCLA, they had to make promises that they wouldn't reveal people's identities, which would revealing that would expose them to a great deal of harm from the Iranian government. Another privacy factor, another privacy dimension that we looked at, this was not actually Activist Archivists, this was our partner Witness, the human rights organization. They helped develop this tool called Obscuracam. And this is a tool that uses the face detection on a camera to then blot out the faces of people so that they're not identified. There are now other tools that do this. Here's a tool I found on the web that just uses face detection and then blurs it. This is a form of redaction to protect people's identity. We also wanted to, through Activist Archivists, we discussed issues around commercial services with the creators or recorders. So we did a study of uploading video to YouTube and to Vimeo and to the Internet Archive, and then downloaded that video and compared the metadata from the original video to the metadata that was saved on YouTube and Vimeo and the Internet Archive. And what we discovered was that YouTube threw out most of the metadata, and they took the metadata for date created and replaced it with metadata for date uploaded. So YouTube was not a very archival friendly place for people to put their videos. So we encourage people to at least to instead upload things to Vimeo or to the Internet Archive, where it would where the metadata needed to access that material later on would be better preserved. We also worked with Creative Commons, making people aware of Creative Commons as a place to to make things allowable, to allow archives to actually collect material from social media. So some tips for archives on outreach to communities. First of all, to build trust, to speak in their language, not archive speak, to identify ways you can meet the needs they already perceive, to approach projects as collaboration wherever possible, and to not only focus on content and metadata, but also on rights that can be an impediment to preservation. So some remaining applied research questions. How do we deal with scale with the tsunami of born digital content? How do we avoid our collections continuing to reflect the world of the rich, well-known, and powerful? We need better methods for collecting social media and threaded phone text messages. There's a tension between archiving and privacy and handling massive amounts of redaction, and improving public policy in terms of service in areas like intellectual property, privacy, and what happens when someone dies. So my slides are all at the URL that's right here. And it's, or you can go to my homepage and there's a link off the top of my homepage. And that's it. Time for questions.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I think in this particular view, well, I want to have your contact information up here. I also can't see hands from anybody very easily. So does anybody want to signal a question for Professor Becker? Yes, Maria Estiva, my colleague up at the Advanced Computing Center.
Hi, let me show my face here. Do you see me and can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Okay.
Maria.
Hi, Howard, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, I have a ton of questions, but let me start with something that archives have traditionally done to preserve, back to your first slide, which I found very, an impact, legal action against people. So traditionally, archives have decided to take some distance between what's being recorded and when it's being shown. Traditionally, archives have these periods in which materials are closed to the public. You could access this and that after 100 years, after 50 years, after, it depends on the deed. And that was precisely, some of it was designed to avoid these possibilities of lawsuits, etc. It seems to me, though, that in this day and age, when you have everything, in social media, these periods, these closed periods, which made sense before and were affordable or were possible before, now they don't make a lot of sense. By the time archives are reducting the information or blurring the faces, etc., this information is out there in social media. So can you comment a little bit about that specific, period in which archives are closed to the public, they're being processed, and why that doesn't make sense, or if it makes sense today?
Yeah, well, today our expectation is that everything will be available from anywhere across the internet. Um, uh, Archives in certainly in the last decade, archives have become much more vigilant in their, or hard-nosed in their donor agreements, to not have periods of where the material is unavailable. So archives, they're resisting to in donor agreements, they're resisting agreements that say that this will be embargoed for X number of years, simply because of the expectation of users of these archives. They expect access. And also managing that is managing how long, when something can be available, adds a lot more work for the archive, keeping track of all of that. So, but, when you have sensitive material like the Green Revolution in Iran, you really want to collect as much of that as possible, but you can't let it be public, because the people can get killed from this. They can be thrown in jail and actually convicted of capital punishment crimes. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it's another of these tensions that are unavoidable, I guess.
Yeah. I have if I don't see any other hands yet, but I had a question. I love that you laid out a lot of pros and cons to different practices and to some of the behaviors around archiving video that has sensitivities. I was wondering though, if you can actually make recommendations. Like, I was especially thinking of the releasing videos issue that you talked about. Are there some cases, or are there some places that you think have espoused what you would call best practices on releasing video?
Yeah, the the there are certain jurisdictions which have really done a lot of work with the stakeholders to develop best practices. So, for instance, as I showed you, the policing project at New York University School of Law had developed this process in New York City for the police department in New York City. And though I don't totally agree with their set of guidelines, it did reflect all the stakeholders' concerns. The key ones to look at, I think, are New York and Los Angeles Police Department. Both of these were extremely transparent in developing their guidelines. So you can actually go online and find the details of their process and how they were weighing the different aspects, as you said, the pros and cons of of uh, both of when the camera is turned on and when it's turned off, the pros and cons of who gets to see it and when and how long they keep it, all of those things. But I think that the LAPD and the NYPD are probably the best examples. And both of those worked with the policing project at NYU.
Great, thank you. Any question from the audience at this moment? Yeah, Phil Doty.
Hey, hi, Howard. Can you all hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
hi Phil. It's been a long time since I've
Yeah,
seen
very
you.
long time. Our hair and beards certainly show that, if nothing else. But thank you for a fascinating and as expected, extremely well documented presentation. As you know, I'm not an archivist, so I'll ask a question that might be a little untoward, but I'm sure you're more than up to wrestling with it. Given the police power of the state with subpoenas and search warrants and the the power of commercial actors like arbitrary changes in collection and distribution policies and new partnerships and third-party data aggregators. Do archivists feel a moral dilemma in increasingly documenting the everyday lives of ordinary people, not just those who've been underrepresented, underdocumented, but the vast swath of us who have little power when compared to those corporate and governmental actors?
Yeah. Archivists are concerned at the challenges that they face in trying to document everyday life. I gave this as a presentation a couple weeks ago at Berkeley High School, and the person at the Bancroft Library, which is really an archive, who's in charge of this was there, and she was kind of exasperated at all the at being able to do her job. She really felt like she can't, with trying to collect this material, it was such a challenge that she really couldn't do it. And I think that that's reflective of archivists in general, that they just feel that the technical issues of how to do it are kind of put in front of the policy issues. The policy issues, I'm sorry, I'm having a little mental breakdown here. The how do you do it is challenging enough, but the why do you do it and what are you trying to do is kind of, I don't know. I'm having trouble. I'm sorry.
Phil, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you for thinking aloud about it, Howard. You know, that confusion, I think, is endemic to human affairs, and none of us is free from it. But thanks very much.
Yeah.
I I've been told by Stacy we have time for one more question, and Christopher Asaf, who's a almost finished doctoral candidate in journalism and media, wanted to pose something. Christopher.
So, thank you, Sharon. So there, you were talking a little bit about stuff and questioning, whether stuff can be shared that was done in public, but the general understanding, like, is that if you are in public, you know, rights to privacy are very, very, very limited. And so I was curious as to what you're referring to when you said some of the issues surrounding privacy in public.
Well, there's
Like if
there's a,
like a picture or video from like,
there's a legal aspect and there's a moral aspect.
Hmm.
In terms of legal, most things that are done in public, an archive collecting material like YouTube videos that were shot in public, legally, those things, the archive can do that. They can't do it legally for copyright reasons, perhaps, but they can collect it and make it available. If we ignore copyright for a moment, legally they could make these things available, but there's a kind of moral imperative not to get people in trouble. So you have, for example, the people at a demonstration. You don't want, the archivist doesn't want to collect the January 6th collection with faces showing. They don't want to participate in that kind of in a court proceeding around that, with those things becoming evidence. Did that answer the question?
somewhat. I mean, taking the January 6th situation into consideration, the government has collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours worth of things that now the House Republicans are talking about releasing without redaction. And so, when, I think part of it depends on the source. And then, yes, there's a moral issue if you don't want to get people in trouble. But if it's a protest and they're outside and they're in the public and it was recorded by a person and you have permission, and then let's say it's not a violent protest or it's not there's no physical altercations on either side of the issue. I mean, would that be problem? Would an archivist see that as problematic?
Probably not, but they might see it as problematic for a time that you might want to embargo it. Historically, it's important to save something. So take something like January 6th. You've got, we're now past the period of time of where people were taken to court. 2 years later, 3 years later, people are no longer going to be taken to court over this. And then it becomes part of the historical record. It becomes an important part of the historical record, of course. All the January 6th protests, those are a part. But having an embargo over a certain period of time, when, yes, there's no expectation of privacy in public, but there is an expectation that you're not being zeroed in on, that you're not, that when you do something, you aren't expecting a recording to be made of it.
That brings up all sorts of issues
Yeah.
beyond moral or legal.
Mhm.
Trying to think for the subject who was out in public at a protest. Whether, I mean, I can see embargoing and maybe waiting till the statute of limitations are over, but saying that there's an expectation of not being recorded, we're being recorded at every minute, almost
Yeah.
everywhere now.
Yeah.
So that argument becomes mute. And I'm talking in the United States or a country like this. I'm not talking like Iran or like some of these other places you've been talking about.
Right.
And and then also the position of the person that made the imagery or the recordings has to come into consideration as also, because if they're in a capacity of working for a publication, a news publication, or if they're in the capacity of working for an organization, or whatever the situation may be, or if they're even with the organization that's organizing the event and the recording there. Yeah, I'm not saying right or wrong here, but these considerations take branches depending on these issues of place, person recording, and the type of event and the statute of limitations. So, and I know an archivist has a different responsibility, but there's a lot, it goes very deep, and that's just something to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions from the group?
I have, well, we are now at the time in which this is a smaller group.
Yeah, I was going to thank everybody for coming, and Stacy already did this in the chat. There she is again. And if you want to leave, but I am fine, and Howard has until 1:30 kind of reserved, and we thought some of the researchers would chat with him as well. But if there are other questions, we could take a little bit more time. But if you have to leave, feel free to leave.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate it and look forward to seeing you again soon at another Good Systems event.